morning. This is Bill from Curious Cars and Auto House of Naples on a pretty deceptive Florida, I think it's a Wednesday morning, but again, they're all blending together these days, so it just doesn't really matter. The weather is nice right now. Right now it's fine, but again, it's deceptive because by the time 12 o'clock rolls around, it's going to be shitty and hot and humid and miserable. It's that time of year where you get fooled a little bit by the nice evenings, the very late evenings, the very early mornings. You think it's going to be a nice day. You even ponder bringing a light jacket to work, and before you know it, you're just suffering in a swamp of miserable, humid heat that just kills your will to live. And that's where we're at right now. And frankly, it's not even April yet, so oh God, these are not my favorite days. The days of summer are ahead, and I'm just not happy about anything. I'm a little bit deep into the Soviet whiskey, or the anti-Soviet whiskey, I should say. It's not like I'm on their side. But, it used to keep the coronavirus at bay, but that's gone the way of the dodo bird. Nobody even mentions it anymore. I see a few stragglers wearing masks around, and they look like an odd curiosity when I'm in the supermarket or whatnot. But otherwise, the world just continues. And of course, being in Florida for years, it's not been a dramatic change. Basically, Florida gave up the coronavirus a couple of years ago. And it's been sort of odd to hear about it, still going strong in other places. But anyway, that's gone. The anti-Soviet thing is in effect, and I'm taking full part in it because you just never know when there's going to be some Soviet hiding behind a tree or, doing some other terrible thing on Twitter that makes anybody unhappy. So, that said, we're well protected and we're able to dive right into this car. And what I have today is a 1985 Pontiac Trans Am. It's an iconic car model and name across 30. That's great. I've got these are things that have actually bothered me. This one, not as much because it says water on the side. Let me zoom in on that. But I've actually seen these same water truck on the side. And frankly, that just seems a little bit redundant to me. But, I think it's terrific that on this weirdly deserted residential street at, 6 in the morning, we've got some lunatic out here pumping water, spraying the medians. I just think it's absolutely fantastic. And I'm so happy that it's here while I'm trying to do this video. Couldn't be any happier. The birds don't even bother me with that thing going on. But anyway, where the hell was I? A Trans Am, 85. This is a 1985 Pontiac Trans Am, an iconic car model and an iconic name across 33 years and 4 generations. And for the snowflakes out there, who may not be familiar with these cars, the name Trans Am has nothing to do with what bathroom this car uses, not at all. It actually was named after a very famous racing series that pitted domestic and import manufacturers against each other in cutthroat competition. But of course, that was more prominent in the late 60s and early 70s. But given its present implications, it's probably for the best that Pontiac is defunct. I mean, it would otherwise be an ignoble end to one of the true great muscle cars, which managed to be potent across all 4 generations, unlike some of its competitors. So you really have to hand it to Pontiac for that. The Firebird started as a sister car to the Chevy Camaro. A consolation prize for John Z. DeLorean, who wanted a Corvette competitor instead. He was going to name it the Banshee, and it was already under development. But GM Brass decided that Corvette didn't need a competitor, certainly not internally, and they took it away from him. So instead they gave him the Firebird, based on an F-body, the Chevy Camaro. And he was going to have to use that instead. So, he took it and he did what he could with it. John Z was a pretty cool cat. He went up against the very successful Ford Mustang, the Mercury Cougar, and decided that he didn't just want the Firebird to be an addendum to the Camaro. He wanted it to have its own identity. So he put a lot of effort into developing it right off the bat and came up with some pretty neat shit. So Before I get into it, I tell you what, I'm going to pause for a minute because this thing is driving me friggin' apeshit, and see if it goes away if I wait for 5 minutes and have a little more whiskey and maybe a cigarette. Bear with me. Alright, so I've moved to another part of Peter's expansive rich guy property, and hopefully I'm far enough away from this stupid water truck to make the sound go away. The only bad news here is that it's surrounded by a bunch of flora and fauna, and God knows what kind of animals are going to leap out of these you know, little bits of underbrush and attack me, so the hell with it. I'm also fighting condensation on the car, so, you know, it's just another shit morning. It's just a parade of shit mornings, you know. The day at work is a shower of bastards, and the mornings here are just not much better. So the hell with it. We're going to get back into it. The Firebird would be an F-body pony car, as they were called. That was as started by the Mustang, and it went toe-to-toe with them, and they did quite well, you know, all things considered. And again, the car guys at Pontiac weren't satisfied with the idea that it would just be a, you know, an afterthought to the Camaro. They wanted it to have its own identity, and they did a terrific job doing that. They came up with some interesting engines. They had some big engines. They had some fascinating power options, one of them being what they called the Firebird Sprint Turismo, and that was powered by a overhead cam 6-cylinder in the spirit of the Jaguar XKE, because that was a car that John Z. DeLorean liked very much. And it was developed, that engine, for the Banshee product, but of course that was defunct, so they moved it over into the Firebird. And the Sprint Turismo was built for, again, John Z's love of European cars, and the suspension was tweaked by a guy who worked at Pontiac, who became a legendary F-body guy named Herb Adams. You may have heard of Herb Adams' suspension. Well, he was, of course, a Pontiac guy back in the day. And the mules, as they call them, the development cars, for that Sprint Turismo, became the basis for a much more famous and long-standing name, the '69 Pontiac Trans Am. And that was a fascinating car. It was released without virtually no fanfare, no advertising, which is a bit strange. It was only offered in white. It had blue stripes. It had a wing on the back. It had all kinds of special bits and pieces for about $700, maybe a little bit more than that. But that was expensive at the time, and without any real advertising, they just didn't sell that many of them. Well under 1,000, I think 750 or so. And it came only with the Ram Air 3 or Ram Air 4 engine, a 400. And it was named for this SCCA touring class called Trans Am Racing, which it kind of was in its heyday in the late 60s and early 70s. And it pitted, you know, again, these domestic manufacturers against each other. You had Ford and Chevy going really head-to-head, and some of the best names in driving and racing were in it, and the teams were factory-supported. There was a 2-liter or less class, and then there was a 5-liter or less class, and what's interesting about that is the Pontiac Trans Am didn't qualify for Trans Am racing because it only came with a 400, which of course was a 6.6-liter, and well over what would be allowable for the rule books. If you know, like a 69 Z28 or a 69 Ford Mustang, they had 302 engines, and that was so they could compete in Trans Am racing. But Pontiac took the name, they put it on this car. They did it, by the way, without any, you know, acknowledgement to the SCCA. They just grabbed the name. The SCCA didn't like that, so they ended up suing Pontiac later, and they came to an agreement where Pontiac would have to pay the SCCA a royalty for every Trans Am they produced. So it's just kind of interesting that the one car called a Trans Am didn't actually ever run in Trans Am racing, at least in the early days. But what it did do was spawn off 32 more years of Trans Am production and made one of the most iconic names in certainly American car history. After only 3 model years, the next Camaro Firebird came out. This one. 67, 8, and 9 was the first gen. 1970 brought out the second gen. And that was the height of the muscle car era. And the Trans Am was, gifted with these things accordingly. There were Ram Air 3s, 4s, there were 400s, 455s, 4-speeds, posi traction, scoops, the wings, all of these things that were sort of the peak of the muscle car thing. But of course that immediately preceded the malaise era, which, the Arab oil embargo, all that stuff came out a couple of years later and put the kibosh on most of that stuff, which was a shame. Not to mention the high insurance costs for muscle cars. So the fun was essentially destroyed from, call it 1973 or 4 onward. But while the Mopards, Fords, Chevys, they became they became kind of anemic. The Firebird bucked the trend. The guys at Pontiac sort of kept everything going. During the beginning years, they had the SD 455, which was a terrific engine, considered very potent for its era, and was much more powerful than what Chevy or any of the other companies had out at the time. And this continued all the way through the second gen Firebird. The 77 through 79 Trans Am, made famous by, the Smokey and the Bandit movies, is considered by, some pretty serious people to be the last true muscle car. Obviously, it was inflicted on by all the malaise stuff at the time, but it still put out pretty good horsepower. And even as late as 1979, you could get a pretty peppy 400 4-speed in that car. And, of course, it's considered to be... it's pretty collectible today. Over the last couple of years, I've watched them absolutely skyrocket. I mean, you used to be able to get a pretty nice example for, 20, 30 grand. Triple that now to get the cream of the crop. And it just shows you that the cars are becoming very, very appreciated. But in 1982, the third gen came out, like this one. And the people instantly loved it. It was a very, very successful car. It was an alternative to sort of the, while still being a personal luxury coupe of sorts, it was not a true personal luxury coupe the way Lincolns and Cadillacs and that sort of thing were. It still had a very sporty flair to it. And it had been a hit in movies. The Firebird had always sort of been a movie car. You had McHugh, that beautiful dark green Trans Am in the early 70s. You had Jim Rockford, Rockfish, driving around that Esprit, which was actually a rebadged formula because he wanted to have some pep. And then, of course, you had Burt Reynolds in the 77 Trans Am, which absolutely took America by storm. So there were a lot of expectations for this car, and it came through. You had Knight Rider. Okay, that came out in 1982. It utilized a 1982 Trans Am, and it was better than any advertising campaign that Pontiac ever could have come out with. I mean, it was phenomenal. It was all over television. People went nuts for it. I was a kid, and I went nuts for it, to the point that I still absolutely lust after having a 1982 black-on-black Trans Am with those bowling ball hubcaps and some sort of, LED sweeper in the front. Nothing would make me happier. If I could have one of those cars, I would be so happy. But what are you going to do? It's one reason I'm happy to have this one. So 85, to me, it's not the best trim package. It's not the most peppy or potent Trans Am, but it's still pretty damn good looking, and I'm still pretty thrilled to have it. Probably the most potent of all of the third-gen F-body Firebirds was the 89 pace car Trans Am, the turbo Trans Am, which used the motor from Buick's G&X, which was, of course, some of the hottest performance stuff stuff going on at the time. And it was insanely quick, at least in its era, and was the first car actually to pace the Indy 500 that needed absolutely no modifications. I mean, it was a pretty neat car. They didn't make that many of them, and they're kind of a holy grail for collectors today, and I've watched them take off. But the hell with it. I tell you what, I'm going to pause for a minute to give this water truck time to pull away. Have a little bit more of my anti-Soviet whiskey, see if I can put my anger behind me, and then we're going to keep going. Alright, we're back. I can't tell you how unsettling this stupid water truck is to me, and how it's just destroyed this entire video. So I'm just going to barrel through the rest of it and be done with it and move on, and we'll get something else later. But, you know, there it is, just typical, you know, outside events conspiring to once again destroy my life. And that just seems to be the theme of what's going on these days. Let's do a very quick look at the events of 1985. I've done them before, but the hell with it. 85 was a great year for me. I loved 1985, so I'm going to do it again. And, you know, if you don't like it, I guess you can either move on to another video or fast forward through this part. Excuse me, but the hell with it. We're going to go through with it. So look, in 1985, you got the Soviet Union. You got Mikhail Gorbachev, if you remember that guy with the birthmark. He came to power, ushering in a newer and younger and friendlier Soviet Union. And, you know, a lot of people in the United States went nuts for him. They thought, oh, what a great guy. Oh, my God, he's, you know, if only we had someone as forward-thinking as Mikhail Gorbachev. Well, I mean, the embittered old bastards in the Soviet Union picked him to preserve the Soviet Union. They saw what was coming. They saw everything was collapsing, and they thought that this guy with the birthmark and the pretty wife could buy them some time. So that was the whole point, you know, to get some concessions from the West, to get a little bit of space, to get a little bit of breathing room and keep the Soviet Empire going. Of course, it didn't work out. The damage was too much from all the crap that had been happening, and of course from the pressure of Reagan and all the military buildup that the Soviets couldn't keep up with. You had Chernobyl, you had shitty wheat harvests, and it just put a collapse on. And of course all that's coming up again, so it's all prescient today. But anyway, it didn't work out. The Soviet regime was dismantled. New Coke came out, to the puzzlement and, you know, the absolute nobody knew what the hell was going on. They thought, you know, here you have this incredible product that's synonymous with soft drink. You know, why the hell are they coming out with a new formula? But they did. You know, I guess some people say it was because the patent was expired. Whatever. Somehow it didn't work out. Nobody wanted new Coke. They very quickly came out with Coca-Cola Classic, and that eventually disappeared, and Coca-Cola just became Coca-Cola again. So it just went over about as well as a Bible in a whorehouse. Nobody really liked it. You know, you could compare it to the Cadillac Cimarron, the Edsel, a variety of other really failed products that just didn't work out for the people who did it. Hijackings were a big thing in 85. You had TWA 847. You had Egypt Air 648. You had that cruise ship, the Achille Laura, if you remember that one, where they threw the guy in the wheelchair off. It was all very horrible. And there were just bombings and misery and violence all over the Middle East. And, you know, it was a time of great strife in the world. Michael Jordan, Rookie of the Year in the NBA. He went on to have a pretty decent career. The Unabomber killed his first victim, who, you know, if you look back, if you look at his manifesto, he actually had some pretty fair points, you know. He probably should have run for office instead of bombing people, and he might have actually gotten somewhere instead of, you know, running around in a hoodie and sunglasses with mail bombs. It just didn't work out for him. But, you know, I don't think... The guy actually had some fairly reasonable points if you look at it now. The Titanic was located That mystery was solved. And it turned out it was at the bottom of the ocean. You know, nobody saw that one coming. But they finally did find where it was, and they sent down robotic things to photograph it, and that was a pretty big deal. The Philadelphia police actually dropped a bomb on a big house full of domestic terrorists, which it's amazing to me when I think about it now. It caused a giant fire. 53 housing units were destroyed. It's just, you know, I mean, with all the stuff we have going on with the police these days, the idea that they were out there dropping bombs from helicopters just seems bizarre, but they were. And, you know, it didn't work out for the domestic terrorists, and frankly, it didn't work out for Philadelphia with big fires going on all around. Movies. You had Rambo, which was fantastic. You had Back to the Future, which, of course, you know, bringing back John DeLorean, there it was. You had The Breakfast Club, Commando with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Witness. I always liked that movie. Not sure why, but I did. You had Fletch, you know, which famously talked about the Oldsmobile Buick. You had Pale Rider with Clint Eastwood. Rocky IV, that's where Sylvester Stallone basically single-handedly won the Cold War by giving that sort of pained and strained speech at the end of it. That was it. I mean, when Rocky IV came out and that speech happened, neither the Soviets or the Americans could keep going the way they were. That brought everybody together, and it became, you know, the end of the whole Soviet empire. TV, you had Moonlighting. If you remember the BMW, that was a pretty big deal. You had the Golden Girls, which, you know, as I get older, I realized that some of them were kind of hot. You had MacGyver. That became a thing. And, of course, The Equalizer with the old British guy, later to be replaced by Denzel Washington. And, of course, Knight Rider was still going with David Hasselhoff and the A-Team, which was another great car of my youth. If I ever get one of those black vans, I'll be so happy. Music, you had Live Aid. They came out to help people. You had Duran Duran driving the, you know, teenage girls insane. Starship making music that was absolutely bizarre. Aha with the strange video. ABC, Madonna. You had Bruce Springsteen. You had Dire Straits. They were really taken off at that point. Huey Lewis and the News. They were everywhere. Phil Collins, David Bowie, and of course, you know, everybody's favorite feel-good music, The Cure. And being like 14, 15 years old at the time, I absolutely knew every song. I loved it. It was, you know, when I look back on it now, it's just amazing to me. I couldn't tell you the name of a single current artist, probably, on any of the charts. But when I was 14, 15, in 1985, I knew all of them. So anyway, there's a little trip down memory lane, but let's get back to the car, and we're going to get into the exterior styling. I think it's a masterpiece. I'm not going to lie about it. And again, maybe it's because it's a product of my youth. It was an important car. It has an important place in my heart. But I think it was an absolute masterpiece. I mean, it was a little bit European exotic. It was a little bit American muscle car, and even manages to throw in some homage to the original '69 Trans Am. It has a long and low front end, absolutely, you know, swooping long front end. You've got fog lights there in the bottom. You've got pop-up headlights. You've got no obvious grille. It sucks in air from underneath. You got the Trans Am badging. You've got big air vents there at the front of the hood. That was particular to the Trans Am, and of course reminiscent of the '69. You also have little air vents at the back, which was reminiscent of the '69, and the sides down there underneath the fenders, underneath the Trans Am logo, and that, of course, was going on across all the generations. You had a very raked windshield, very, very cool. You could get a T-top roof still in this gen, which I like, and this one has. You've got kind of a nice low C-pillar, and then this swooping hatchback rear end with a big window, which, of course, became a thing from mid-second gen onward. So a lot of homage homage in this car to prior Firebirds, while at the same time being pretty exotic looking. I'll never forget when I saw the first one rolling around, and I thought, oh my God, it's like they wanted to make a Ferrari. And I just thought it was absolutely terrific looking. What can I say? You know, I mean, Trans Ams have always been a little bit gaudy. I mean, there's no question about that. You got all kinds of swoops and spoilers and ground effects and decals and badging, and, you know, this one is no different. You got the Firebird on the C-pillar there. You've got Trans Am logos on the fender. This one says 5.7 liter FI, which is, of course, incorrect for basically any 85 Trans Am, because you could only get the 5 liter, but they did actually put a 350 in this one, so it's correct. This one also has the GTA style 16-inch wheels, which I'm not sure it would have came with. I think it had a different set when it was new, but these things look terrific on the car, and of course are very, very correct. You also have hidden wipers. I think that's quite neat. You've got some nice subtle creases in the hood. The doors are incredibly long and heavy. You do have ground effects going from the front to the back. You've got that whole sort of aero thing coming into play by the mid-1980s that would just go on from there. You've got taillights that swoop across the entire back end. The plates in the bumper, and this one does have some sort of custom exhaust. You've got, you know, 4 pipes coming out the back, which I think look pretty damn good. The door handles are the same ones that were on my 79 Firebird, probably on a 72 Firebird. A lot of stuff on this car was still GM parts bin. The mirrors do look nice and aero. I think they look great. Probably would have benefited from having a power antenna, or like my old 79 Firebird, having the antenna built into the windshield. I think it just looks a little bit I don't know, it's a bit too much having a fixed antenna mast there. So, but long story short, I just think it's an absolute masterpiece. I'm going to pause for one moment, and then we're going to get into the hatch, we're going to get into the engine, we'll get into the interior. So hold on one second. Alright, let's have a look inside the hatch of this thing. We're just going to get this video over with. Alright, the struts are still good enough to pick it up, which is nice. So, these F-bodies gave you a terrific amount of storage in the back, especially down here. You have infants or toddlers. They've got their own built-in playpen. I mean, you can just dump them down in that little pit. You know, they're probably going to be able to climb out if they're of a certain age, but if they're real young, no chance. They're just stuck back there. And I like the way this light's popped out. Anyway, you can see those bags. Those are for T-top storage, as are the straps. So when you pop the T-tops off this thing, you can put them in those bags and you can store them back there, and that's all very nice. Being the 80s, you had narcotic storage here in the side. It's keyed. There you can see some of the jacking tools and a nice little area to put a, you know, I don't know, what do you had in the Miami Vice here, you know, bales of weed or coke or whatever went in there, and it's vented, so there won't be a problem. And otherwise, just a very nice hatch area. And of course, that rear seat also folds forward, so if you need even more storage, you got it, which makes this thing suitable for going to Costco. You know, because the Trans Am, frankly, had moved somewhat away from performance and more towards luxury, it has stuff like this, which is an electric suck down. Not unlike the Eldorado. That kind of threw me for a loop when I first bought this car, and I thought it was crazy, but I think that's why people who really wanted all the true performance opted for the formula models. The Trans Ams were just like, you know, Cadillac Eldorados. Have a look under the hood. If I can get under here. I don't know what the hell that sound was. Alright, so there it is. Here's a 5.7 liter HO. Now, I think, maybe I've got my information wrong. I don't think I do. I think in 85 you could really only get the 5 liter HO. I don't think the 5.7 was a thing, so I think that's something that people put on here. But maybe I'm crazy. Maybe that did come out in 85, and somehow my references got crossed. So, but anyway, you could see this one is also finished in Pontiac blue, that engine block, which is very much not correct. You know, this would have been finished in corporate GM at the point. It's not a Pontiac motor. It's essentially a Chevy truck motor, and that was fine for the time. Everything under here is just absolutely immaculate. The people who own this thing, I know they'd owned it for many years and they restored it. It actually has been painted. They, you know, had the engine out. It's advertised as having 385 horsepower. It's got a cam and aluminum intake. It's got stainless headers. You know, they did a very, very nice job under here. I can't vouch for the power output or whatever they said, but it definitely is a little bit hopped up from factory, and does look terrific there. But in 85, you could get the 5-liter HO. That could come with a 5-speed manual, which was kind of the preferred setup. You could also get the 4-speed automatic. You get into the standard Firebirds, of course, you could get 6 cylinders. Earlier Firebirds, you could get 4 cylinders. So they really had a wide spectrum of engines that would suit just about every need. I love the pop-up headlights. I like the cold air intake there going into the air cleaner, and everything looking pretty nice under the hood of this car. With the low roofline, of course, it had to have a low intake, had to have a low carburetor. Otherwise, you had to get into modifying the hood, which, of course, a lot of people did back then to make these cars more high performance. But I think these people got this one just exactly right. Fits under the factory hood, has some nice performance upgrades, and looks pretty terrific overall. So everything nice and proper under the hood of this thing. Let's have a look inside. I do love the T-tops. I really should have taken them off. I like how the door handle says fuel injection, which was, of course, a big deal at the time. Not actually sure this one does have fuel injection. Thought it had a carb on it, but yeah, maybe not. Maybe it does have the throttle body. I should have pulled the air cleaner off and looked. I tell you, I'm getting lazy. Low slung is what this is. I mean, you're basically sitting down on the floor of this car. You've got these 2 front bucket seats. They have recline, which is nice. My Firebird didn't, and it had a fixed back position, and that was it. That was all you got. This generation, you started getting into the reclining stuff. The door panels, I think, are nice and proper. You had all this sort of 80s computer aero stuff starting to happen with, you know, everything looking kind of Tron-y and modern. These weird little pockets, man. These cars have bunches of. There's another one on the dashboard. I think it's strange. It would be a good place to stuff a gun, drugs, knives, whatever it is you need to take with you in the 80s, and, you know, there it is. Back seats, fine, you know, not a ton of room, but again, when you're on your way to a, you know, Van Halen concert in 1985, more than enough room to have a little tryst with your girlfriend in the back. And of course, I think many relationships were came to fruition in the back of a mid-80s Pontiac Trans Am. Let's hop in and see what we got. I'm gonna pull it forward and try to get some shade on the cluster. Let's fire this thing up. That exhaust does have a nice growl to it. Alright, there we go. There's some shade. Okay, so they were not lacking on instrument cluster. I mean, you have these 4 giant big dials. You've got, of course, your only an 80-mile-an-hour speedo in this thing, with the 55 indicated. You've got your tach to the right of it with, you know, 5,000 red line. Being a Trans Am, you get things like a tilt wheel, which doesn't, yeah, it works fine. You get cruise control, very nice stuff, you know, intermittent wipers. You get full gauges. You got your voltmeter, your oil pressure, your water temp, and of course your fuel gauge. You got your vents. You got some of the strangest buttons in Pontiac history. So, you know, you've got 3, this is the rear defrost. So here's how you turn it on. You press that guy. Here's how you turn it off. They give you a separate button for that. And here's the indicator that it's on. one. So you have 3 buttons to manage one rear defrost, which seems strange. 1 button just for the trunk release, 3 again for the fog lights. Here's your lights over here, you know, getting into all the sort of 80s GM stuff. You could get crazy buttons and displays on more advanced models of these things. Like I had a Grand Prix once that had 40 buttons on the steering wheel. This one was not so equipped, but horn still works good. Down here in the center console, you've got your air conditioning, you've got your Delco stereo, you've got center console with your 4-speed automatic, you got your power mirrors, your power windows, you got a little center console here with cassette storage, exactly what you need in the 1980s. Can't seem to pop one. And there it is. So your Van Halen cassettes went in there. Nice little spot for narcotics here. And I don't know what the hell you're going to put in there except papers. And then in lieu of a glove box, you get this opening folder here, which never took the registration out. But anyway, there it is. I mean, what a bizarre little thing to have on this big Trans Am Velcro pocket. And being the Trans Am, you get the performance suspension. I also should have mentioned that being a Trans Am, you got 4-wheel disc brakes, you got posi traction in the back, you know, all very nice stuff. Up here, these things do have shades for the T-tops. Those can be removed, and of course then you've got the glass T-tops, which you remove by running that handle there. So all very interesting stuff. And of course you get a mirror with lights underneath it because, yeah, again, you opted for the Trans Am. It does have a nice rumble to it. Let's go for a spin. So you really can't see much of the hood because, of course, it's angled and sloped downward. Oh, god damn it. I just realized because I moved over there, I didn't put all my crap in the car. So I tell you what, I'm going to pause it for a minute, get my crap in here, and then we're going to continue the drive. Hold on one moment. You know, I'll show you one quick thing on these wheels. I remember having these same center caps on my 79 Formula. They weren't correct for it, but the guy who, you know, put it together put them on. And I remember being an idiot kid who did this like $5,000 neutral dump. That's where you know, have the car in neutral, you rev it up to $5,000 and you slam it into drive and the back wheels are gonna light up. Well, mine didn't light up. Instead, it just broke the transmission off the engine, turned the drive shaft into a U, and I'll never forget sitting in the seat watching one of those center caps fly like 400 yards off into the woods beside the shop where I was doing it. And it was one of those lessons you learn as a kid that, you know, stick with you. You know, don't be a retard. Don't be an idiot. And I have to say, you know, it was a valuable lesson, but I probably didn't learn it well enough. Oh, God. Anyway, let's go for a spin. Again, this thing has some kind of fancy exhaust on it running from the headers. It looks stainless all the way to the back. I don't think it's true dual, but none of these cars really were, so it does seem to be a pretty big pipe, though. Apparently all the suspension's been done by some place called Hawk Suspension, and that's supposed to help this thing as well. So whoever had this car spent a lot of money on it. I think it was a love thing. It was owned by a woman. They do get attached to cars sometimes. Let's go for Peter Slowgate here. So again, you have to like the gauges. You see just 66,000 miles on the clock of this. The AC, nice, you know, vents, everything going well. It's just a great cruiser. You know, yeah, look, these cars, when the 5.0 HO engine came out in '83, it was a big deal. I mean, when you look back now and see it's like 185, 200 horse, whatever the hell it had, you think, oh my God, that's nothing. Well, this was coming out of the malaise era, when even like, you know, Ford 460s and Mark V's at like 140 horsepower. You have to keep this in mind. And that HO motor, going up against the Ford Mustang with the 302, reignited the horsepower wars that would last for the next 30 years and lead to these 700 and 800 horsepower Camaros and Mustangs that you have now. now. And of course, even reinvigorated Chrysler to come back with rear drive V8 Hemi powered Challengers and that sort of thing. So we all owe a lot to these cars for, you know, if you're a car guy who likes horsepower, these things really brought the muscle car era back. Sun's not too bad. I cleaned the not even that good, but I did a little bit of a windshield cleaning myself. The water truck's gone. See if we can get a little wheel spin out of this car. No, not at all. Yeah, I don't know, about 385 horsepower. I feel like that should have given us something. Of course, we're getting pretty good traction. I was able to get wheel spin in Peter's driveway this morning. It's got a nice V8 rumble to it. But you know, that was the era. I remember Magnum PI, they had to have that 308 GT Ferrari spin out in the grass because it wouldn't do it on the pavement, you know. By the time Smokey and the Bandit 2 or 3 came along, they had to hot rod the cars because they only had those 4.9 liter turbos. Were just not putting out enough juice. It wasn't until the you know, this car, these mid-1980s cars, when horsepower started to come back in a real way, and the factory only took it so far. For the most part, it was tuners who had to bring it further. So, but I'll tell you, man, there was a pretty big car scene at the time that I was a part of, and these cars factored pretty heavily in it. I'll never forget them running around. Of course, the posi traction thing helps you get traction. If we had one wheel spinning, we'd get all kinds of burning going on. It wants me to slow down, which I will. But I'll tell you what, so here it is, 1985 Pontiac Trans Am. This one is in epic condition. Really, really incredible car. Drives great, really nice piece, and will be for sale at Auto House. And what a car of my youth, man. I mean, if you guys are looking for a cruiser, something that the attention you get in this now, because there just aren't any. All these cars got used up. They just aren't what they used to be. They're not. They used to be everywhere, man. You saw them all over the place, but not anymore. You know, they just got chewed up, ate up, and thrown away. And the nice ones, the few that remain, are, you know, they're pretty few and far between. So if you have an interest in this car, you can call the guys at Auto House. This one will be there. Auto House, Naples.com, or 239-263-8500. Is that right? That sounds a lot like our old web. That's it. That's probably it. Anyway, I really appreciate you having a look today. I'll try to get some more fun stuff coming up soon, and try to get another one up this week. I know I've been a little bit lax with the videos, so got to get some more cars ready, and that's going to help. And otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you, everybody, for subscribing. Love reading the comments. You guys absolutely knock me out. I've had a couple guys visit, which, I mean, I don't know, man. I mean, I'm just an old, sad, drunken used car salesman. It feels very humbling to have somebody come and visit because they watched it on YouTube, so I really appreciate that. But anyway, look, thanks for having a look, and we will see you at the next one. Take care.